Long before refrigerators, nutrition labels, grocery stores, or anybody arguing on the internet about saturated fat, human beings figured out how to perform a little nutritional magic. They took milk, a food that spoiled quickly, and transformed it into something that could last longer, travel further, taste completely different, and in some cases become easier to digest. That food was cheese. And here's what makes cheese especially fascinating. Modern nutrition often looks at cheese and sees saturated fat, sodium, calories, and cholesterol. But when researchers actually feed people cheese and compare it with other foods containing similar amounts of saturated fat, something strange happens. Cheese doesn't always behave the way the nutrition label predicts. So today, we're going back more than 7,000 years to figure out how humans discovered cheese, why ancient cheesemakers may have accidentally solved a digestive problem, why cheese and butter can affect cholesterol differently, rather cheese is really addictive, and why cheese can be either a fantastic low-carb food or the food quietly sabotaging your progress. Welcome back to Food Under the Microscope, the series where we take foods you thought you understood, explore their history, and then put the science under the microscope. And I've been loving how much you're enjoying this series. So if you wanted to continue, help me hype it up. Like this video, share it with somebody who loves cheese, and tell me in the comments what food belongs under the microscope next. Now let's rewind about 7,500 years. Archaeologists studying pottery from the Neolithic sites in what is now Poland found something unusual. Pottery vessels full of tiny holes. For years, nobody knew exactly what they were. Then scientists analyzed ancient fat residues trapped in the pottery. The evidence, published in Nature, suggested these vessels were being used to separate milk curds from whey. In other words, Stone Age farmers appear to have been making cheese. And think about how clever this was. Many adults in those populations probably did not have the lifelong lactase persistence that allows many people today to comfortably drink fresh milk. But when you make cheese, much of the lactose leaves with the whey, and bacteria consumes more during fermentation. So cheese making may have done two things at once: preserved a highly nutritious food and made dairy easier for some people to tolerate. The exact first cheese recipe is lost to history. There's a famous story that milk carried in an animal's stomach accidentally curdled because of natural rennet. Plausible? Sure. Proven? No. But we do know cheese making became sophisticated very early, by ancient Greece. Homer's Odyssey describes the Cyclops storing sheep and goat cheeses. By Roman times, this wasn't a kitchen accident anymore. The Roman writer Columella described coagulating milk with rennet, pressing the curds, salting them, and aging the cheese. That's basically a cheese-making protocol. And geography helped create the cheese world we know today. Different animals, climates, microbes, caves, salt levels, moisture, and aging conditions gave us radically different cheeses. Parmesan, Gouda, Cheddar, Roquefort, Manchego. Cheese became almost like an edible passport. Then industrialization arrived. Switzerland opened an early industrial cheese factory in 1815. Factory-scale cheese making expanded in America during the 1800s. And eventually, processed cheese took the concept another step, creating something consistent, smooth, meltable, and long-lasting. Which brings us to our first big lesson. Cheese is not one food. Fresh mozzarella is not Parmesan. Cottage cheese is not aged Gouda. Traditional cheddar is not necessarily metabolically identical to a processed cheese product. And that matters because cheese is more than the number on its label. Let's put it under the microscope. Inside cheese, you have high-quality protein, mostly casein, milk fat, calcium, phosphorus, sodium, and depending on the cheese, fermentation products, peptides, microbes, and varying amounts of vitamin K2. But those components are organized inside a physical structure scientists call the dairy food matrix. Think of nutrients as musicians. Looking only at saturated fat is like hearing the drummer and assuming you know what the entire orchestra sounds like. The matrix changes the performance, and one of the best demonstrations involves cheese versus butter. Both can deliver substantial saturated fat, If saturated fat content alone perfectly predicted the cholesterol response, you might expect comparable effects. But randomized feeding trials suggest otherwise. A systematic review and meta-analysis of randomized controlled trials found that compared with butter, hard cheese produced LDL cholesterol levels about 6.5% lower, despite similar ratios of saturated to unsaturated fat. Now be careful with what I just said. That does not mean cheese lowers LDL compared with everything. When cheese was compared with lower fat alternatives, LDL could be higher. The important point is narrower and much more interesting. The saturated fat inside cheese does not appear to behave exactly like the saturated fat inside butter. Why? We don't completely know. One suspect is calcium. Calcium can interact with fatty acids in the intestine and form compounds that are less easily absorbed. But even that explanation appears incomplete. In one crossover trial manipulating calcium within cheddar cheese, the high calcium cheese produced lower fasting LDL, yet increased fecal fat excretion didn't fully explain it. Other suspects include the protein matrix, phospholipids, physical structure of the fat, and fermentation-related compounds. This is why I keep coming back to one principle. Your body doesn't eat a nutrient spreadsheet. It eats food. Now, does this prove cheese prevents heart attacks? No. Large observational studies generally find cheese consumption neutral or associated with modestly lower cardiovascular risk. A large analysis published in Nature Communications found more frequent cheese intake associated with lower cardiovascular and coronary heart disease risk. Interesting. Absolutely. Proof that cheese caused the protection? Absolutely not. Observational studies cannot establish that. So here's where I land. The evidence does not support predicting cheese cardiovascular effect simply by counting grams of saturated fat. But if your ApoB or LDL rise substantially, I am also not going to tell you the cheese matrix makes that irrelevant. Individual situations matter. Now here's another surprise. If someone says, I'm lactose intolerant so I can't eat cheese, maybe, but not necessarily. During cheesemaking, much of the lactose leaves with the whey. Then bacteria consume more of what remains. With very long-aged hard cheeses, lactose can become extremely low or negligible. That's why somebody who gets bloating and gas from milk can tolerate aged cheddar, Parmesan, Swiss, or other mature cheeses quite well. But lactose intolerance is not the same thing as milk protein allergy. Low lactose does not make the milk proteins disappear. And aging creates another trade-off. Some aged and fermented cheeses can accumulate histamine and other biogenic amines. Most people handle these without a problem, but susceptible individuals may experience headaches, flushing, or gastrointestinal symptoms. So sometimes the question isn't, can I tolerate dairy? It's, which dairy, in what form, and how much? That is root cause nutrition. Now let's talk K2. Certain fermented cheeses can be meaningful sources of vitamin K2, particularly longer-chain menaquinones. Hard cheeses often contain more than soft cheeses, although amounts vary substantially with cultures, ripening, fat content, and production methods. K2 has fascinating biology involving proteins that help regulate calcium handling in bone and vascular tissue. But please, don't turn Gouda into a prescription medication. Cheese containing K2 is one thing. Proving that eating a particular cheese prevents arterial calcification is another. The biology is intriguing. The clinical outcome evidence is much less definitive. What about raw cheese? Raw milk cheeses can have distinctive microbial communities and flavors. Enthusiasts make all kinds of nutritional claims about them, but we do not have strong evidence that raw cheese provides superior cardiometabolic outcomes. We do have documented food safety risks from unpasteurized dairy, particularly for pregnant people, young children, older adults, and people with weakened immune systems. So natural does not automatically mean risk-free. What about grass-fed cheese? Pasture feeding can shift the fatty acid profile of milk, including omega-3s and conjugated linoleic acid. Interesting. But demonstrating a compositional difference is not the same as demonstrating fewer heart attacks. Same story with goat and sheep cheese. There are compositional differences, and some people generally prefer or tolerate them differently. But sweeping claims that goat or sheep cheese is metabolically superior are ahead of the human evidence. Now we have to address a question that may start a fight in the comments. Is cheese addictive? You've probably heard that casein breaks down into casomorphins, peptides capable of interacting with opiate receptors, and therefore cheese is basically dairy crack. Slow down. Casomorphins are biologically interesting, but demonstrating opiate activity in a peptide is nowhere near demonstrating that eating cheddar produces drug addiction in humans. There's a much less exotic explanation why cheese can be hard to stop eating. It's delicious. Fat, salt, umami, aroma, texture, energy density, learned reward. Your brain noticed. And this brings me directly to my keto and carnivore community. Cheese can be an excellent low carbohydrate food. Complete protein, calcium, fat, flavor, convenience. And many aged cheeses contain almost no carbohydrate. But cheese can also become what I call the keto cheese trap. You remove bread, you remove pasta, you remove sugar, you start losing weight. Then somebody tells you cheese is keto. Suddenly, there's cheese on the eggs, cheese on the burger, cheese rolled up as a snack, cheese while cooking dinner, and then one final piece of cheese because apparently the previous 7 were lonely. Cheese is energy, dense and extraordinarily easy to add to foods. That does not mean cheese uniquely causes weight loss stalls. We don't have trials proving that removing cheese magically restarts fat loss on keto or carnivore. But if progress stalls, hunger changes, gastrointestinal symptoms appear, or cheese has become less of a food and more of a hobby, experiment. Remove it for a few weeks. Observe what happens to hunger, symptoms, weight, and if relevant, your lipids. Then consider reintroducing it. That's much more useful than arguing online about whether cheese is good or bad. And maybe that's the biggest lesson from our trip through thousands of years of cheese making. Our ancestors took milk and changed it using microbes, enzymes, salt, pressure, and time. They didn't simply preserve milk. They transformed it. They removed much of its lactose. They concentrated its protein, fat, and minerals. They created new flavors and compounds. And modern research is reminding us of something ancient cheesemakers could never have measured. How a food is built matters. Cheese is not simply saturated fat. It's not simply protein. It's not simply calcium. And it's definitely not a free food just because the carbohydrate count is low. It's a complex food matrix. And whether cheese works for you depends on the cheese, the amount, what it replaces, your metabolic health, your goals, and your individual response. That's nutrition under the microscope. And if you enjoyed this episode, hype up the series, like it, share it, and tell me in the comments which food we should investigate next. Because apparently, humans have been arguing about food for thousands of years. We just have better Wi-Fi to help keep the conversation going.